The cowboy wanted a virgin bride, but froze when she taught him the first night. In a future where planets were still wild and untamed, Earth's frontier world struggled to build lives of peace and prosperity. Zane Porter, a seasoned rancher, had spent most of his life on a remote planet called Tierra Nueva. The land was vast, and the skies stretched endlessly, with nothing but the open range to hold it all together. Zane was the kind of man who believed in tradition and hard work and in the old ways of the West. He raised cattle, tended to the land, and watched over his ranch with a steady hand. But times were changing. As Tierra Nueva grew, more people arrived, and the government began to push its way into the lives of the settlers. Zane's family had owned their land for generations, but the population was expanding. It wasn't long before people began to question why the ranchers were still living so isolated. The world was becoming more civilized, more controlled. Some thought it was time for the ranchers to settle down, and for their children to carry on the traditions of their forefathers. Zane's father had often spoken of the old ways, of the quiet strength of the cowboy life, and the importance of a solid family. But there was one thing Zane was missing: a wife. His father had married young, and Zane had grown up watching his family life as an example. However, despite his best efforts, he couldn't find a woman who shared his values. Most of the women on Tierra Nueva were too focused on the future, too involved in the technological advancements that were starting to change the world. Zane wasn't interested in that. He wasn't looking for a woman who wanted to live in a city or run a business. He wanted a woman who could keep the home fires burning, who would raise a family, and who would carry on the ways of the past. But as the years went by, Zane began to think that maybe that kind of woman didn't exist anymore. One day, while at the local market, Zane overheard a conversation between a group of settlers. They were talking about a new woman who had recently arrived on Tierra Nueva. She was from a distant colony, a place known for its strict traditions. The woman, Ember, was said to be pure, untouched, and full of the kind of qualities Zane had been looking for. She had been raised in a community where values like loyalty, family, and respect for tradition still mattered. Zane was intrigued. He hadn't heard of any woman who matched his idea of the perfect bride, and he had never been one to shy away from a challenge. The more he heard about Ember, the more he believed she might be the one. She was said to have a quiet beauty about her, with eyes that held secrets and a heart that was kind and gentle. But Zane didn't care much about looks. He cared about what was inside, about the strength of character and the ability to take on the responsibilities of life on Tierra Nueva. The next day, Zane made up his mind. He would meet Ember, and he would ask her to be his wife. He didn't have time to waste, and he knew this was his chance. He took his old horse and rode out to the small settlement where Ember lived. As he approached, he couldn't help but feel nervous. He had never been one for formalities, but this was different. He wanted to make the right impression. He wanted to show Ember that he was serious about her, that he could provide for her and take care of her. When he arrived, Ember was out in the fields tending to the garden. She was alone, her long hair tied back in a braid, her simple dress stained with the dust of the land. She looked up when she saw him, and for a moment Zane felt a rush of warmth in his chest. There was something about her that felt familiar, as if they were meant to meet. Ember gave him a small, cautious smile, but there was something in her eyes that made Zane pause. She wasn't like the other women he had met. She didn't seem desperate for attention, and she didn't act like she was waiting for a man to come along and sweep her off her feet. Instead, she was calm, collected, and strong. Zane introduced himself, and they talked for a while. He found that Ember was even more impressive than the stories had told. She had grown up on a distant planet that valued hard work and self-sufficiency. Her family had taught her to be independent, to think for herself, and to hold on to the old ways. Zane admired that in her. After their conversation, Zane knew he had to ask her to be his bride. He could see that she wasn't like the others. She wasn't looking for a life of luxury, and she didn't care about the things that seemed important to others. She believed in family, in tradition, and in the strength that came from standing side by side with the person you loved. "I've been looking for someone like you, Ember," Zane said, his voice steady but full of conviction. "Someone who values the old ways. Someone who can help me build a future here on Tierra Nueva. I've got a ranch and I need a partner, a wife who can help me keep things running." Ember looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Zane could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been nervous about asking a woman to marry him, but this time it felt different. This wasn't just any woman. This was someone who could change his life. "I'm not sure, Zane," Ember said softly. "I've been raised to believe in the importance of purity, of waiting for the right man to come along. And while I admire what you stand for, I need time to think about it. Zane nodded. He understood. He wasn't expecting an immediate answer, but he knew deep down that she was the one. He had to win her over, to show her that he was the man she had been waiting for. With that, Zane left Ember's farm, determined to return and prove himself worthy of her. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to fight for what he wanted. Ember was different, and he believed she could be the one to help him build the future he had always dreamed of. Zane woke up the next morning. The sky above Tierra Nueva bathed in a golden light. The harsh winds of the night had softened, and the early rays touched the earth like a promise of a new beginning. He had spent the entire night thinking about Ember, about their conversation the day before. She had agreed to marry him, but only after he proved himself worthy. Zane knew he had a long road ahead of him, but he was determined to win her heart. The people of Tierra Nueva were traditional. Weddings here were simple, focused on the essentials: family, loyalty, and respect for the land. There were no grand celebrations, no big fancy decorations. The ceremony was a quiet affair, held under the open sky, with only a handful of close friends and family to witness the vows. Zane wasn't the kind of man who needed anything more. He wanted this to be real, to feel true to the life he had always known. As the day approached, Zane focused on preparing his ranch, making sure everything was in order for Ember's arrival. He had spent years building this place, and now it would be their home. He didn't have much, but he had worked hard for everything he had. Ember would see that. She would understand that he wasn't looking for a perfect life, but a life where they could build something together. Ember, on the other hand, was more nervous than she let on. She had agreed to marry Zane, but a part of her still hesitated. She had grown up with strict traditions, where purity and submission were highly valued. She had been taught that a woman's place was by her husband's side, helping him with the work of the land, raising children, and making the home a place of warmth and safety. But Zane was different from the men she had imagined. He wasn't just strong, he was kind. He had asked for her to be his bride, and for the first time in her life, Ember had felt a real connection to a man. Still, she wondered if she was ready. Was she ready to leave everything behind and join him in a life on the ranch? The wedding day arrived, and Ember stood before Zane in her simple dress, her face a mask of calm. Her heart was racing, but she didn't let it show. The ceremony was small but meaningful, and when Zane took her hand in his, it felt like the beginning of something important. The officiant spoke the vows, and Ember repeated them with a steady voice. Zane's heart swelled with pride as he watched her, the woman he had chosen to stand by his side for the rest of his life. He had waited for this moment, and now it was finally here. When the vows were spoken, the crowd cheered, and Ember smiled at Zane, though her mind was still filled with doubt. She had never expected to marry a man like him. She had always been taught that love would come after marriage, that a woman's duty was to follow her husband's lead, but Zane's kindness and patience made her feel as though she could take the lead too. Still, she had no idea what the future held. The reception was simple, a few hours spent with close family and friends. Zane's ranch was bustling with activity, everyone celebrating the joining of the two families. Ember's family had traveled a long distance to witness the wedding, and they seemed pleased with Zane. They saw the quiet strength in him, the hard-working man who was ready to take on the responsibility of a wife and a family. Ember's father, a stern man who had never shown much emotion, nodded his approval. "You've chosen a good man," he said to her, his voice steady but warm. Ember nodded, but in her heart she wasn't so sure. She still had questions. She still wondered if she had made the right choice. Later that evening, Zane and Ember stood alone on the porch of the ranch house, the stars overhead like a blanket of lights. The night air was cool, and Zane wrapped his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, feeling the steady strength of his body against hers. "I'm glad you're here, Ember," Zane said softly. "This is the start of something new for both of us. I know I'm not perfect, but I'll do everything I can to make you happy." Ember smiled up at him, though her heart was still conflicted. "I know you will, Zane, but I need time." "Huh. Time to understand how things are going to work. I've never done anything like this before." Zane kissed the top of her head, holding her a little tighter. "We'll take it slow," he promised. One step at a time. But as much as Zane tried to reassure her, Ember couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The truth was, she had always been taught that a marriage was about more than just love. It was about duty, about responsibility, about the roles each partner played in the family. And she wasn't sure she was ready to play the role of the wife. She wanted to help Zane, but she also wanted to be her own person. She didn't want to lose herself in this new life. That night, after the reception, they retired to their room in the ranch house. The bed was large and made up with soft blankets, the light from the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Zane looked at her, his eyes full of hope and excitement. He had waited for this moment, and now he wanted to show her that he was ready. Ember, however, wasn't as sure. She had been raised with the belief that a wedding night was something sacred, something private and personal. It wasn't supposed to be rushed. It wasn't supposed to be about what was expected. It was about connecting, about trust, about sharing something that was meant to last forever. She knew that Zane wanted her, and she knew that he cared for her, but Ember wasn't sure if she was ready for that step. Zane could sense her hesitation. He had been looking forward to this moment, but when Ember didn't respond to his touch, he stopped. He didn't want to rush her. He respected her too much to push her into something she wasn't ready for. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and full of concern. Ember nodded, though her face remained thoughtful. "I'm fine," she said softly. I need some time, Zane. This is all new for me." Zane smiled at her, his hand resting gently on hers. "Take all the time you need, Ember. I'm not going anywhere. We'll take this slow, together." And in that moment, Ember felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had made the right choice. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she could build something real, something lasting. The days that followed Zane and Ember's wedding were a quiet mix of work and reflection. The ranch, surrounded by the wide-open land of Tierra Nueva, became their new home, but for Ember, it felt both unfamiliar and daunting. She had spent her life on a distant planet with her family, learning the ways of her people, but nothing had prepared her for the responsibilities of running a ranch alongside a man like Zane. The physical work was hard, but the emotional challenge was even greater. She knew she had a lot to learn about the land, the animals, and most importantly, about the man she had just married. Zane, for his part, was eager to make Ember feel at home. He showed her how to take care of the cattle, how to fix fences, and how to handle the chores that came with the ranch. He was a man of routine, someone who believed in doing things the right way, and he had always done everything himself. He didn't mind the work, but he soon realized that Ember wasn't used to this lifestyle. She had grown up with different values, ones that were just as strong, but they didn't always align with the hard physical labor of the ranch life. The first time Zane asked Ember to help him with a difficult task, he saw a look of hesitation in her eyes. She had never worked with cattle before, and the idea of dealing with them made her nervous. She had been raised to believe in the value of independence, but her family's traditions were based on a different kind of independence, one where women focused on keeping the home, not working alongside men in the fields. But Ember was determined to prove herself. She didn't want to be seen as weak or unprepared for the life Zane had asked her to share. One morning, Zane led her to the corral where the cattle were grazing. It was a simple task, just moving a few of them from one pen to another, but it required patience and a steady hand. Zane showed Ember how to guide the animals, how to use the gate without startling them, and how to handle the situation calmly. Ember listened closely, trying to keep up, but the cattle seemed skittish, and she felt unsure of herself. Zane noticed her unease and took a step back. "It's all right, Ember. You don't have to do it all at once. Take your time, and remember, you don't need to rush. You're doing fine." But Ember couldn't help but feel frustrated. She had always been good at picking up new skills quickly, but here, on the ranch, everything felt different. She wasn't sure of her place in this world. She was used to being in control of things, to having a clear understanding of her role, but now, everything seemed unclear. She wasn't sure where she fit in Zane's life, or how she was supposed to make it work. That night after dinner, Zane noticed how quiet Ember had been. She sat beside him on the porch, staring out at the stars, lost in thought. He had learned to read her better than anyone, and he could tell something was bothering her. She wasn't the type to speak openly about her feelings, but Zane had a way of getting through to her when she needed it most. "Ember, what's going on?" he asked gently, turning toward her. "You've been distant lately. Is something bothering you?" Ember hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put her thoughts into words. Finally, she spoke softly, her voice full of uncertainty. "I don't know, Zane. It's just, I'm not sure if I'm cut out for this. I've never done this kind of work before. Back on my home planet, I was raised to take care of the home, to support my husband in other ways. But here, it feels like I'm supposed to do everything, and I'm not sure I'm capable of it." Zane listened quietly, taking in her words. He understood now why she had seemed off in the past few days. She was struggling to adjust, to find her place. It wasn't just the work that bothered her. It was the shift in her role in their relationship. Zane had always believed in the old ways, but he also understood that a successful marriage required understanding and compromise, not rigid expectations. "Ember," Zane said, his voice steady but kind, You don't have to do everything. I never expected you to be like me, to work the ranch the way I do. I wanted you to be by my side, but I also want you to feel like you're part of something real, not something that's just about me. This is our ranch, our home. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to be the person you've always been, the woman I married. If that means you take care of the house and the kids, then that's fine with me. If it means we work together, side by side, then that's fine too. Ember looked at him, a sense of relief washing over her. She hadn't expected him to understand so fully, but his words touched something deep inside her. For the first time since their marriage, Ember felt like she wasn't being asked to fit into a mold. Zane wasn't trying to make her into something she wasn't. He was simply asking for her to be herself. It was a moment of clarity, and Ember felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The next day, they tried again with the cattle. This time, Ember was more confident, and Zane was patient. He didn't rush her or push her to be something she wasn't. Instead, he encouraged her every step of the way, letting her take the lead when she was ready. Slowly, Ember found her rhythm. The cattle didn't seem as intimidating anymore, and she began to feel a sense of accomplishment when the task was completed. Over the following weeks, Zane and Ember worked side by side, each of them learning from the other. Zane taught Ember how to take care of the land, how to manage the cattle, and how to navigate the challenges that came with living on a ranch. Ember, in turn, showed Zane the importance of patience, of allowing space for change, and of not being afraid to break away from tradition when it was needed. Their relationship grew stronger with each passing day, and they began to build a life together that felt more balanced. But it wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt and frustration. There were times when Ember questioned whether she was truly capable of the life she had chosen. And there were times when Zane wondered if he was pushing her too hard. But through it all, they learned to communicate, to share their hopes and fears, and to support one another through the tough moments. One afternoon, as they stood together overlooking the land they had worked so hard to cultivate, Zane turned to Ember with a smile. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd find someone like you. You're strong, Ember. You're more capable than I ever imagined. I'm glad you're here by my side." Ember smiled back, her heart swelling with pride. "I'm glad too, Zane. I never thought I'd find a man who would understand me the way you do. You've made me feel like I'm enough, just as I am." And in that moment, both of them knew that they were building something real, something that would last, no matter what challenges the future held. The sun was setting over Tierra Nueva, casting long shadows across the vast land that Zane and Ember had come to call home. The ranch was peaceful now, the day's work winding down as the cattle returned to the corral. Ember stood on the porch of the ranch house, her hands resting on the railing, looking out at the horizon. It had been months since she had married Zane, and though the road had been difficult, she had never felt more certain of one thing: she belonged here. Over the past few months, Ember had learned more about herself and the life she was building with Zane than she had ever expected. The hard work, the late nights, and the constant challenges of running a ranch had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. But it wasn't just the physical labor that had changed her. It was her relationship with Zane. In the beginning, she had feared that she would lose herself in this new life. But now, she had come to realize that she was becoming stronger, more capable than she ever thought possible. Zane, too, had grown over the past few months. He had always been a man of hard work and tradition, but he had learned the value of patience, of letting go of old expectations. Ember had shown him that love wasn't about control or tradition. It was about partnership. He no longer saw himself as the leader of their life together. Instead, he saw them as equals, working side by side to build something they could both be proud of. But despite their progress, there were still challenges ahead. Zane's father had passed away earlier that year, leaving him with even more responsibility to take care of the ranch and the family legacy. Zane had always been close to his father, and though he never showed it, his passing had left a hole in Zane's heart. He now carried the weight of his father's legacy alone, something that had been difficult to accept. One day, a letter arrived for Zane. It was from the local land council, an organization that managed the land and resources of Tierra Nueva. The letter informed Zane that a corporation from a neighboring planet had expressed interest in buying a large portion of the land surrounding his ranch. The offer was tempting, but Zane wasn't sure if he should sell. The land had been in his family for generations, and selling it felt like a betrayal of his father's memory. When Zane read the letter, he stood by the fireplace, the words weighing heavily in his hands. Ember had been in the kitchen, preparing dinner, but she heard the sound of the letter crinkling in his hands. She turned, sensing his tension. "Zane, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice gentle. Zane didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at the letter. Ember walked over to him, her heart pounding. She had seen him upset before, but this was different. She could feel the burden he was carrying. The Land Council, Zane finally spoke, his voice heavy. They've received an offer for the land. A corporation wants to buy it. They're offering a good price, enough to make life easier for us. But I don't know if I can sell it. This land has been in my family for generations. My father worked it, and his father before him. It feels like I'd be betraying everything we've built here. Ember stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm. She knew how much this land meant to him, but she also knew how hard it was to keep everything going. The ranch had never been easy to maintain, and the demands were only increasing. She had learned that sometimes change was necessary, even if it was difficult. Zane, I know how much this land means to you, Ember said softly, but you also have to think about our future. If selling the land gives us the chance to grow, to build something stronger, maybe it's the right thing to do. You're not betraying your father by making a decision that helps us survive. You're honoring his legacy by making sure we have the resources to keep going. Zane looked at Ember, her words sinking in. She was right. His father had always said that a ranch could only survive if its owners were willing to adapt, to make hard decisions for the sake of the future. Zane's father had never been afraid of change. Maybe it was time for Zane to follow that example. The next day, Zane and Ember took a ride out to the farthest corner of the ranch, where the land met the edge of the corporation's property. A landscape stretched out before them, vast and untamed. Zane stopped his horse and looked out across the land. It was a beautiful sight, but as he stood there, he realized something. The land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was memories, it was history, it was the foundation of his life. But it wasn't the only thing that mattered. Ember, I've been thinking, Zane said quietly, his voice full of resolve. Maybe we do need to sell some of the land. I've been holding on to it because it's all I've known. But we can't keep going like this, not without help. Maybe selling part of it will give us the chance to invest in the future, to make sure we don't lose everything. My father would have understood. Ember smiled, proud of Zane for coming to this decision on his own. She had known all along that he was capable of seeing the bigger picture, but sometimes it took time for the heart to catch up with the mind. Together, they could face whatever came next. Back at the ranch, Zane made the decision to accept the offer from the corporation. It wasn't easy, but it was the right choice. He called the land council and arranged for a meeting, ready to discuss the terms of the sale. Ember stood beside him as they signed the papers, knowing that this was a new chapter in their lives. The land sale brought much-needed resources to the ranch, and with the extra funds, Zane and Ember were able to make improvements. They bought new equipment, hired additional hands to help with the work, and made the ranch more efficient. The future looked brighter than it had in years. As the months went by, Zane and Ember continued to work side by side, building a life together that was rooted in both tradition and progress. Their bond grew stronger, and the challenges they faced only brought them closer. Zane learned to lean on Ember more, to trust her instincts and to share the burden of decision-making. Ember, too, found her place on the ranch, taking on more responsibilities while still maintaining her sense of independence. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Zane turned to Ember with a smile. "You know, I never thought we'd make it this far," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "But here we are together. I couldn't have done this without you." Ember leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of the moment. "We've come a long way, Zane, and I think this is just the beginning." Zane nodded, looking out at the land they had worked so hard to build together. The future was still uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. With Ember by his side, they could face anything.